Okay. Uh, Welcome to session number 15 of Apex at Home Day. My name is Salim Hilayel. In case you don't know me, I'm the Principal Product Manager for the Oracle Application Express in the Middle East. I am based in the city of Abu Dhabi, in the capital of the United Arab Emirates. And today we have for this session, Carsten Czarski, and a fancy title, Apex and the Rest of the World. Carsten works for Oracle in Germany since 2001, and he has been doing Apex since 2004. Focus of his work is database-centric application development. Since March 2016, Carsten is a member of the Oracle Application Express development team. He's also focused on the exec engine, REST integration, data loading, and other topics. Before Carsten starts his session, I would like to remind you, please, if you have any question, post it in the Q&A section, not in the chat. And please provide your feedback for this session. The feedback survey will be open 10 minutes before the end of the session, and it will last 10 minutes after the end of the session. And you might get a chance to win an Apex School hoodie. Thank you, and please, Carsten, you can start.
Yeah, Salim, thank you very much for introducing me. Hello, everybody. 8 p.m. here in Germany, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to people listening. Yeah, so in the next 45 minutes, I would like to give you an overview about the status quo, the current situation regarding REST integration in Apex. There was a lot of development in that area over the last years. And starting with Apex 18, when those features were first introduced, then there was some further development in 19.1 and 19.2, and we might end up with a brief outlook on what to expect in the future. So in general, we can say that the story of REST, or external data source integration in Apex, is a longer lasting one, so this is at least good for new functionality in the next few releases as well. Okay, so the usual things, right? An Oracle guy is talking to you, and if an Oracle guy is talking about the future, baseline is don't believe anything and don't make any purchasing decisions based on this. Salim already told you that I work for Oracle since 2001 in the Apex team since 4 years. And if you want to get in touch with me, feel free to send me an email or contact me on Twitter. It's rather easy to get in touch. Okay, so let's now dive into the topic. And I would like to start with a bit of motivation and architecture, right? Because very often we just introduce the new features. But now I would like to take the opportunity to put all the stuff, all the functionality about REST into some sort of bigger context, right? Because it was not just REST, right? There are also a few architectural changes within Apex, which were done primarily for these external data sources, but which have quite a few other effects as well. And when talking to customers, in the last time more online, but before that at conferences, I noticed that there are sometimes questions about that, and there is a goodie which has nothing to do with REST. There are always goodies here and there which come out of this new architecture. So let's talk a bit about that first. Then I would like to walk you through the various features regarding REST integration in Apex. And then finally, I would like to demo a few of these pieces to you so that you have an impression of what Apex can do for you in that area. Okay, so let's talk about the architecture of it. And that is a very basic picture, right? We have Apex in the upper left corner, right, with our typical 3-tier architecture. So we have the database in the center where Apex runs, then the database is front-ended by auths. And at the very left, we have the browser where you are sitting in front of your Apex development environment or in front of your Apex application. And then the interesting bit, and that's what we are talking about today, is when Apex talks to external sources, right? We have database links, so to say, traditionally Apex talking to databases somewhere else in the enterprise. We have SOAP services, which we are doing for years. We have REST, so that tiny word here, that's our focus today. And we have also REST-enabled SQL. And I won't touch too much on REST-enabled SQL today. and there was a presentation on this in the morning of my time. And this was when Andrea Monteanu talked about REST-enabled SQL, what this is, how it compares to database links, and so on. So if you didn't see that so far, have a look for the recording when that becomes available. REST-enabled SQL, just in a nutshell, you front-end another Oracle database with ORDS, and then there is ORDS opens, let me put it that way, a special sort of RESTful service, which allows you to execute arbitrary SQL or pure SQL on that remote database, and Apex can access that. So besides database links, which is a tight integration even at the SQL layer, we have a few integration requirements here. So we want to integrate those REST-enabled SQL services into Apex, and we want to integrate REST. And when we designed those features, so that was back in 2017, we noticed already, and that was the situation. We were talking to customers, we were monitoring the OTN forum and the other discussion forums, and it was recognizable and obvious back and even before, to be honest, that the REST service consumption or the requirement to integrate with external data sources, that is here to stay, right? It became more and more popular. All sorts of applications had requirements to talk to some third-party REST service somewhere. And don't get me wrong, this was even possible before, right? So even with Apex 4, with Apex 5, it was possible to reach out to an external RESTful service. But it was more or less all manual coding, right? So there is still the Apex Web Service package, and then you can reach out to the external REST API and you get some XML or JSON back. Then you parse that, and then you can build Apex components on this. You can process the data with some PL SQL. So it was possible, of course. The question is, how was it possible, right? And when we look at this, we had more or less this picture here, right? So at the very bottom, and this is always true in the database, we have UTL HTTP. Whenever you talk to an external service over HTTP, UTL HTTP is the workhorse which does your job at the end of the day. So in Apex, you most often don't deal with UTL HTTP directly. You are using the Apex Web Service package, which is way more easy to use than plain UTL HTTP. Coding also, Apex Web Service is nicely integrated with Apex as such. So we have, the Apex has some measures in place. So with Apex Web Service, you can limit the amount of web service requests which are done for workspace, so that not a single workspace is executing millions of web service requests, right? So we have Apex Web Service and UTL HTTP to do the actual HTTP work, and then you get some JSON or XML back, and that is being parsed, right? Either with Apex JSON, or if you're working on a more modern database, 12.2 or higher, then you are more and more using native SQL JSON function. But still, it's using, and you can see this already, it's all coding, right? It's manual stuff. Then that's how it goes, right? You build your own custom PL SQL package, maybe building a table function. A table function is likely once you start building charts or reports on top of this, and then you might build a classic report, an interactive report, or charts, or something else, right? But at the end of the day, all the REST interaction is your manual coding, right? And that is not what Apex is supposed to be. And that was when we had that picture in our mind, that was the signal we need some change here, right? Because all the stuff here is low-level work, it's plumbing code, it's doing the similar stuff over and over again. And that's actually something which Apex should do for you guys and which you shouldn't do yourself. So the idea and the goal is to make REST and REST-enabled SQL a first-class data source in Apex. So it should become available, or let me put it that way, Apex should enable you to build components on a RESTful service as it was a table, right? So you can build a report on a table with a few mouse clicks, and the goal is it has to be as easy for an external RESTful service, right? It should be available for all components. So that took us a bit of time to get to that, to get there. And when we thought about how something like that has to be implemented, it became clear that the way how Apex components access their data needs to be streamlined. And that was a big change in Apex 18, which was triggered by RESTful services, but which has consequences, positive consequences, right? Very positive consequences for all the other components and also for just building components on top of SQL. And I will show you a few examples for this in a minute. Okay, so how do Apex components get data? So previously I had a slide here which described again the situation pre-Apex 18, but I took it out because I can tell you in earlier times, every Apex component built their own SQL and executed their own SQL, and that changed, right? So we implemented a central piece in Apex, a central place, which is there to provide data to Apex components. And we call this the exec infrastructure. And all Apex components talk to the exec infrastructure to get their data. And we also have an interface for plugin developers, right? The Apex exec package. So plugin developers can also, instead of building a SQL and executing that with execute immediate, plugin developers can talk to the exec infrastructure as well and request data from the exec infrastructure. And the exec infrastructure is built for several different locations, right? One location, the traditional location, is the local database, right? That's what we always did in Apex. And then with 18, we introduced the new locations, which is web source. That is RESTful services. We called it web source to have a more broad term, because web source can be even more than RESTful service. In the long run, would be even possible to use that for SOAP, right? So we wanted to have a broader term here. And REST-enabled SQL is what I just mentioned. So you're talking to remote orgs, sending a SQL across and getting results back, right? So for local, or so when we have a SQL data source, we can have SQL query or SQL block. That's what you are used to, right? You know, and all the years, you were able to build a classic report, for instance, based on a SQL query, or on, how do we call it, SQL function body returning SQL query. So, and here is the first interesting bit for you guys, right? Especially if you're more familiar with Apex 3.4.5, and if you did not have the chance to look too much into Apex and 19, then here is already the first consequence for you, the first cool thing for you, which has nothing to do with REST. And let me show you just briefly. Increase, I hope everybody can see my screen fine. And I would just like to point you to Page Designer. And this is a 21 instance. And this is available since 18.1, right? And once the page is loaded, I would just go ahead and create, what shall we create? Let's pick an interactive grid even, right? And we can create an interactive grid on the M table. There is no M table, so it doesn't matter. But the interesting bit is not a table. The interesting bit is that we have for interactive grid, table view, SQL query, SQL function body returning SQL query, right? Whenever the component uses that new central piece, that new central infrastructure, the same features for access for getting data is available to the component. And by introducing that architecture, we, as so to say, a side effect, but I think it's a very useful side effect, for instance, SQL function body returning SQL queries, so dynamic SQL became available for all Apex components, right? For interactive report and for interactive grid. Of course, that doesn't mean that the columns of your interactive grid can be dynamic, right? Interactive grid, interactive report still need a stable set of columns to work properly, because both components store metadata on the column level. However, the table clause or the where clause, so that the stuff after your from can be totally dynamic, right? And that's the cool thing. You get, so more or less for free due to that new infrastructure. It was not our goal from first hand, but it was a nice side effect, and we appreciated that coming in so nicely. right? So so all SQL execution or HTTP request execution is, as I mentioned, not done by the individual component, or in that case your plugin, but by the exec infrastructure, right? And with 19.2, we leverage the exec infrastructure at another place. So, for instance, when we introduced Interactive Grid with 5.1, Interactive Grid offered that nice capability of using an Oracle text index for search, right? So that you can leverage fuzzy search capabilities for your Interactive Grid, which is a super cool feature, right? You're searching a customer database and you want to have fault-tolerant search for names. And from the last more than 40 years of experience, I can tell you with my last name, that is a very useful feature, right? But however, it was only available for Interactive Grid because the support, the technical implementation was a part of Interactive Grid, of the component. Now, with the exec infrastructure in place, we put that implementation to the central place. And guess what? Oracle Text becomes available for Interactive Report, for the new pop-up LOV, and for faceted search, right? Because we have it in a central place and all the capabilities become available for all the components, right? So, but let's now talk about what that means for REST, right? So the Apex exec, the exec infrastructure is, and that's what we just learned, is able to execute either a local SQL, it's able to send SQL to a REST-enabled SQL service, or it's able to execute a RESTful, to invoke a RESTful service when we have a web source module. So let's now get into a bit of demo, and let me show you what that actually means. So how does the exec infrastructure talk to a web source, to an external RESTful service when a report wants to have that data, right? So we have the classic report, we have that picture clearly in our mind, right? Okay, we have in our mind how that REST API looks like. There's some HTTP address and that returns some JSON. But how does this work together? What does Apex do here, right? And it's best to show this with a nice demo. I have shown this demo before. I will do it anyway, but it should really suit you to give a good impression on how this works. All right. So when we have an application, so I created that very simple application before, right, with just an empty page. And when we go to shared components, we have in the lower left, we have the data sources section. And since Apex 18, we have web source modules as one of these entries. So let's have a look into this. And right now, nothing has been created. This is a brand new application. So it's empty, of course. So let's create something. Okay, what do we want to tap into? I have a nice REST endpoint for sort of a movie database. So what does that return? And here we can see how these REST APIs work. We have that URL endpoint here. We can invoke this, and we get some JSON back. And obviously, that JSON contains the data we are interested in. And more or less, all the REST services work that way. A few have authentication. A few have different JSON structures. Others have different ways to invoke them, but it's more or less always the same. Okay, now to create an Apex component on top of this, Apex needs to know a few things, right? So when we look at how this looks like, right? Okay, Apex can invoke a URL. Okay, the JSON, yeah, when we look at this, yeah, this could be a table, the results here. We have rows, we have columns. So when you look at this, yeah, this could work, right? We can think about, yeah, it should be able to treat this like a table and to build an Apex component on this. But Apex would need to know a few things. Apex would need to know the URL. Apex would need to know how this JSON looks like. And maybe Apex also would need to know which parts of this URL are variable and which are fixed. Okay, so let's now try to build that. Okay, we built a new web source module from scratch. It's simple. So Apex supports multiple types. So this is with Apex 18, we introduced those three types. So this is simple HTTP, this is Oracle REST Data Services, or this is Oracle Cloud SaaS services. If you are unsure, then you always pick simple HTTP, right? Those two mean Apex knows a bit more on how these REST APIs work. And for instance, for an Oracle REST Data Services, Apex knows that ORDS returns large result sets in multiple pages. And Apex can then follow this pagination without having you to worry about it. ORDS allows to push down filters to the RESTful service to get a subset of the result. And Apex, in that case, knows exactly how the request is to be made then. So you don't have to worry about this. However, for the movie database service, we don't know. It's probably not built on ORDS. So Apex does not know anything about this RESTful service. So we will go with simple HTTP. And this is something we are working on for future releases to allow you to extend that list, right? To add knowledge on other web service types to Application Express. So that's in a very early stage. We are working on this. We'll not be able to show anything in that area, but that's an area which is discussed and which is being worked on, right? But let's concentrate on what we have, right? Okay, I'm so I'm providing a name for the web source module, and I'm simply pasting in the URL into that endpoint field. So next step is Apex tries that URL out and sees whether it's reachable at all. And now Apex offers us to split the URL into a server part and a service part. One server, a remote, we call it a remote server, so there is a one-to-many relationship between the server and the web source module. So when you move the web source, the remote server, all the associated web source module will move in one step, right? So in that case, I would even like to adjust this a bit, right? And I think this is how it looks like, all right? So let's continue. We don't need authentication here because we provided the API key, and then let Apex discover that. So what Apex now did, it did the same what I just did in the Firefox browser. It invoked the URL, but while we were just looking at the JSON, clicking around a bit and wondering, well, what can we do with this? Now Apex really went through that JSON, looked up where are arrays, what each array element, what attributes does it have, what data types are these, and based on that JSON, Apex compiled what we call a data profile. And that data profile has, as we can see, Apex was able to detect data types, number, varchar, and even a date with a format mask. And here we see a preview on the data. So reports on that RESTful service would look like this. And that's pretty much what we want to have. So looks good. Create. All right. And now Apex has created a web source module. Apex now stores metadata about this external RESTful service. And we are back to the good old story of Apex. Apex always, from the first days, it was all about metadata. Everybody in the audience, we have a large audience here, but I think everybody knows that the key concept of Apex is that our applications are stored as metadata, right? That we have a table which stores a row for applications, application pages, regions, and so on. Every piece in your application is declaratively stored as metadata. And the engine uses that metadata to generate nice and cool application pages for you. And web source modules use the same idea and the same concept for external RESTful services. So we are storing metadata on this external API. So we know about the URL. We have the structured information that this is the server and this is the service. We have structured information about the dynamic parts of the URL, right? So these are two parameters, and these parameters can change. We have declarative information about the HTTP method and for which database. So the database operation is actually the Apex operation for which this module is used for. So whenever an Apex component fetches rows, report, chart, calendar, whatever, yeah, then this operation is suitable to execute, right? And we have the data profile information, which contains very concise directives how the JSON is to be parsed and how to turn this JSON document into a structured table. So everything is here, right? So now we can start building a page, right? I will choose the existing one, and let me just create a component using Page Designer. And let's start with a classic report. We will have more sophisticated components later on. So, but we will start very simple. So let's do a classic report. And this is what I meant when I said it should be as easy as if you were working with a table. We simply pick web source as the location. We pick the web source module, and we are done, right? So see the value of metadata, right? So the web source module metadata knows about columns and data types, and voila, the report just uses it, right? We can, let me hide the overview column to make the report a bit more compact, right? Okay, so let's run that page. And you see, I did not do any manual coding, right? I just configured Apex, and there we go. This is our report based on external REST API, and the external API has nothing to do with Oracle, nothing to do with a table, and but it feels like we were working with a table. And the data type stuff is also real, right? So the release date column, for instance, was a date column. So, and if it was a date column, we should be able to use date formats, right? So where is the format mask? Here we are, and let me use the since format mask, which gives me a nice textual representation of this. And let's try this again. And the stuff which you can use for tables, which you're used to, which you're familiar with, it's available for the external data sources as well. And you can see that movie is pretty old, right? Okay, so, but what else can we do? So this is a fixed report on Star Trek, which is nice, but I think a variable, so a search field would be nice, yeah? And so let's try to add this. And so first we need a region for our search field. We call it search. Let me add a page item, P1 search. We run the page again. So here's our search item, and then we should be able to search for Harry Potter, for instance. But of course, nothing will happen right now because I created an item, but I did not combine anything here, right? So let's have another look. I was telling you that after the web source module was created, we quickly went through all this metadata. And remember, there was the metadata about the URL parameters. Metadata, structured information about that external API. And guess what? It's available here. So Apex knows that this is some dynamic thing for that web source module. So we can hook it up here. And now we can connect the web source module parameter with our search item. And that's more or less it. The only thing I would like to do is to hide the report if no search term was entered, which I think makes sense. Right? So we only want to display the report if the search item is not null. So, and then let's try it again. And here is our Harry Potter, right? And here is our, what was that? Star Wars. And out of nothing, right, we were able to build a search UI on top of an external API. Done, right? And it's all metadata. I did not use a single line of PL/SQL coding. All we did was configuring metadata. And this is actually available with 18.1. So what you just have seen is the status of REST services in Apex 18.1. Right, let me quickly go back to the slides. But you now have seen the basic concept of what a web source module is, what REST integration in Apex means. The key concept is we have we store metadata for the external REST APIs, and the engine, the Apex engine, The exec engine, we learned about it before, has an understanding about what it means to call a REST API. And the web source module contains the required metadata. And based on this architecture, the Apex component, like a report, a chart, or whatever, is able to call into that external API. So to wrap this up, this is we are not done yet, but this is the first step or first milestone. We have understood how this works from an architectural point of view, and here is how it developed so far. Right. So the biggest release, of course, was Apex 18.1 2 years ago, because that introduced the whole new exec infrastructure. It introduced support for read-only components. That's what we started with. So Apex 18 allows to create web source model or to create classic report, interactive report, charts, calendar, tree. What else do we have? A reflow report, column toggle report, and I think charts, of course. The charts are there. So to make it short, all the components which don't touch any data, which just visualize data, those were supported in Apex 18.1. A few components were not hooked up to the exec infrastructure and probably will never be. Right? One example is the legacy tabular form. Another one is the native PL/SQL region. I think we can all agree does not make much sense to hook these components up. These are really legacy. Then we had 19.2.1, which came out about a year ago, last year. And then we enhanced the exec infrastructure to support DML, so read-write support. So Apex components can now talk to the exec infrastructure and have the exec infrastructure executing insert, update, delete. So again, this is a structured way. So the Apex component does not build the SQL insert, update, delete statements itself and executes it. It talks to the exec infrastructure. So to say, it places an order in the exec infrastructure to place an insert, update, or delete on that data source with those values, right? And once that was there, we were able to introduce the new form region. And so form pages were hooked up to support external data sources as well. And since form region, since the legacy, the old form pages carried quite some history, we built that form region, and and when we look at the form region, we can have another look into Page Designer just quickly. And when I create a new form region here, you see again the effect of the exec infrastructure, right? We have a form and we have a local database with the enabled SQL web source, right? Of course, if you pick a form on a RESTful service, the RESTful service must be able to execute put, post, and delete requests. If the REST service does not support these, you won't get far in building a form. But if the REST API does support this, then you can build these forms. But even on a local database, we have the same select lists again. A form can be now built on a SQL query, and that was not possible before. Forms were created based on tables. And look here, a form can even be built on a PL/SQL function body returning a SQL query. It's the same architecture, right? So when data is loaded in, so assume we have chosen this one, right? The form is loaded, Apex executes that function query body, a SQL query is returned, that SQL query is executed, and the form values are loaded. You make your changes, click save, then again the function body is executed, you get a SQL query back, and then it updates that SQL query. All right, that's how it works. And you can update a SQL query. That's how Interactive Grid works for 5 years now. And the exec infrastructure, again, made that available to all the components. All right, getting back to the slide. And with Apex 19.2, which came out in last November, we sort of completed the support for Apex components. Interactive Grid was missing, and lists of values were missing. And many of you know that Apex 19.2 brought a lot of improvements regarding list of values, and one of these were REST support for list of values. And I would like to take that opportunity now to show you a few things which are now possible with a REST API and the new list of values. The upcoming release 20.1 contains a few very minor bug fixes and improvements for RESTful services, but no large big new feature. But as I mentioned in the beginning of the session, there was quite some work going on. So the story of external data source support in Apex is not told, right? So there will be new functionality coming along in future releases. Okay, let's now have a look into 19.2 support, right? And I would like to show you first, so I think we should create a new page here, because that is done. And I would like, before creating before playing with the list of values, I would like to show you a tiny improvement which was introduced in Apex 19.2. It's really tiny, right? But I like it because it emphasizes the value of metadata, right? It really highlights this idea of storing metadata about something and then to actually use that metadata. So I would like to build an interactive report. Well, let's do interactive grid. Right. So, and again, on our movies RESTful service. And let's first have a look. Yeah, looks familiar. We have the layout of interactive grid. And the interesting bit now is that interactive report as well as interactive grid already have a search field. Right? Remember when in that classic report before, I needed to build the search field. It was quick, of course, but here the search field is already there. So why not using this? And this will not work. I didn't, there is no, here is the query thing, but what should I link, to what item should I link this? There is no item. So there could be some weird substitution, but that's not how this should work, right? So we thought about something else is needed here. And the idea is, if we think about solving this with metadata, then we first have the idea that this is a standardized operation, right? This is a row search, right? And interactive grid provide a row search, interactive report provide a row search, and other components provide row searches as well. Okay, so when we look into the metadata of a RESTful API, so let's go back to the web source module, into our movie web source module, then we can scroll down and we see our parameters again, right? The API key and the query. So let me have a look into the query. So this is a query string variable, so it will be appended to the URL. The name is query, the default value is Star Trek. And then we have a few switches here. And the use for row switch, the row search switch is new in 19.2. And that's one of my favorite tiny things in Apex 19.2, because it's a simple switch with an enormous effect. We can have a look into the help text. And what we are doing here is we declare that parameter to be the row search parameter. So whenever an Apex component performs a row search, Apex will use this parameter, or Apex will pass the search term as this parameter. So we hook that up at a metadata level. So let me save the changes. And by just flipping that switch, I immediately hooked up my interactive grid row search. So we can now simply search for Harry Potter or for Star Wars. And it became even easier, right? We don't even need to bring up the search field. It's just by combining or connecting the capability of the Apex component to the metadata of the web source module, and we get what we want. Right? So here's our interactive grid with the row search hooked up. And then, of course, let's now play with a list of values. And this is new in 19.2 as well. So we can create a new list of values. VLV on top of the external data source as well. So this is what I meant when I said the support for Apex components was sort of completed. And like always with an LOV, we provide a return column and a display column. So we can edit that, and that hooks into generic LOV support, right? So that's the features of the new LOV in 19.2. So we can have additional columns. So let's really do something nice here. Release date, load average, and I think that should be enough. So we now have additional columns configured. Let's store that. And now let's again go to our page 1. Or page 2. And let's now create, this is our LOV region, right? Let's create a page item. And this shall be my movie. And I would like to see the pop-up LOV because that allows me to show the searching thing again. And I simply pick the shared component LOV. And again, with almost nothing, I'm able to build a pop-up LOV. And first, it comes up with the default of Star Trek. But if I'm searching for Harry Potter again, because it's already hooked up in the metadata, I don't need to change anything, right? So the metadata knows query is the row search parameter, and as I mentioned before, pop-up LOV does a row search, and so Apex knows what to do in that case. Take the search stream and pass it to the REST API as the query parameter. And again, with doing almost nothing, you can see that we hooked up a variety of Apex components. And especially when you think about something like this, you have in your in the company, you have REST APIs with branch metadata or employee metadata, customer metadata, product metadata. And this can be really provided as REST APIs, and you are able to build Apex components directly on top of these APIs, and that's really powerful, right? Okay, so I think also looking at the time, I've shown almost everything I wanted to show. So let me wrap this up again. The REST support was introduced with Apex 18.1, right? So when we introduced a new architecture and the basic support and how REST service support looks like and external data source support look like, that's what you have seen with web source modules. And the idea is really to integrate that at the metadata layer. Right? I didn't show you everything, right? I didn't show you how authentication works. So Apex supports basic authentication and the OAuth to client credentials flow. I didn't show you how DML and forms really work. It's always difficult to build a compelling demo example for DML, which is more than the end table and which is also available on the internet for you guys to try out, because DML means you are actually changing the data. So I steered clear from that for this session, but there are write-ups on this so that you can read how forms on RESTful services works, and so you can see from 18.1 over 19.1 and 19.2 there was a clear development how these features evolved, right? So we have seen that, and it's almost 8:45. So this concludes my presentation, and I'm now happy to take questions.
Thank you, Carsten. We actually have a lot of questions. We'll try to grab some of them. One of the questions, can we create a web source for CSV file on GitHub?
For a CSV file, you can't build, so web sources as of today only support XML and JSON JSON responses. That's what the word I was looking for. So you can't use web source modules for CSV data. That's something we might really need to have a look in. What you can do, however, is that's a bit off topic, but let me briefly show you one pointer. With 19.1, we introduced the Apex Data Parser package, which is a pure SQL package containing a CSV, and as you can see here, CSV, XLSX, JSON, or XML parser. And the thing is this one. Apex Data Parser takes in a blob and parses that and returns the parser results as a table function. So you select from your file. And when I said Apex Data Parser takes a blob, Apex Data Parser doesn't care where this blob comes from. So you can use Apex Web Service to get a blob from somewhere else, and then use Apex Data Parser to parse that and to process the data. I understand, of course, it's not the same as having a web source module, but it gets you a step into that direction. It's really having it at a web source module is something we need to look into.
Great. Another question, if the JSON structure changes on the remote server, does the metadata in Apex change automatically?
It doesn't change automatically, but you can always rediscover your data profile. And that's actually another interesting aspect of web source modules, because as I have shown before, all the data profile information is part of this web source module metadata over here. Right? So we can clearly see the columns, and the data profile pretty much acts as an interface, right? So the column names and the data types, so to say, that's the interface to the Apex engine and to the Apex component. And the selector is, so to say, the implementation. So let's consider a very easy example. Let's assume the title in the JSON changed, right? It now says movie title. And just an attribute change, nothing else. So we would just change that. It doesn't happen automatically. You need to do that, either like I did now, manually, or that's the other way, you can do a rediscovery, right? So that does the process of web source creation again. So it fetches the JSON, looks what attributes, data types, and items are there, and then it compares it to what we have. And no wonder, or let me put it that way. So let me change this one, movie title, save it. And so let's now assume the JSON structure changed. It used to be movie title, but now it's just title. So let's do a rediscovery. And now we can see our title thing here, right? And since our data profile is in use, Apex cannot simply replace it. We can extend it, right? So, and the new columns now have been merged into our data profile, and we should have a title column here as well. So you can either rediscover or you can adjust the data profile manually. But the data profile can really act as an interface between the REST API and the actual usage in Apex.
Yeah, great. Another question, when using web source modules, is there a way to programmatically or dynamically change the base URL? Typically, there would be a need to switch between test and production URLs for the remote
so for test and production URLs, we have the concept of that remote server. And you can see that the base URL is read-only here. And we've chosen from a remote server. So we can edit this object, and this stores that URL, that base URL prefix under a name. So there is, for a given application, so the application is in the Apex instance is running, it's up and running right now. There is no API to change that base URL within an existing application. However, there is this prompt on install switch here. And this is especially for the situation that the application is moved from a development instance to a production instance. Because then we very often have the situation that we are developing on a development Apex server talking to development RESTful services. Now this is moved to a production Apex environment, and of course, the production application is supposed to talk to production RESTful services. And that's exactly what this thing here is for, right? So we can turn that to on. And when you now export and import the application, when you are doing that using the Builder API, you will be prompted, right? There will be a prompt screen which tells you, oh, this application uses those remote servers. You can provide new values here. If you're importing using the command line, there are Apex application install procedures which allow you to set the remote server for the application to be installed, right? So this works pretty similar to credentials or to proxy servers, which can be set or which can be changed while deploying an application from test to production, right? But if you want to just flip the switch within an existing application, for that there is no API available.
Yeah, great. Okay, I have another question here. I use web sources in production. It's an awesome feature. However, it does not work well with nested JSON. Are there any plans to support nested JSON? Maybe put snippets of JSON in a dedicated CLOB column.
Yeah, so that's what we are also thinking about. So I get this question every now and then. Nested columns or nested JSON has some difficulties to solve, not necessarily from the technical point of view, because the technical point of view is rather easy, right? Because at the end of the day, Apex doesn't do the JSON parsing itself. It utilizes database functionality. So the database has a great JSON parser. There is the JSON table SQL function, and Apex just leverages this. And the JSON table function is indeed able to handle those nested structures. However, the difficulty is, and that's where we need to put some more thought in, is when we want to deal with nested structures, how to expose this here, right? How should the data profile look like? You were just saying, so one possibility would be to project this as just as a CLOB column with a JSON fragment. That would be one possible choice. Another possible choice would be to flatten everything out, right? So for each element of the nested structure, you could build a row of the result. We have to come at the end of the day, and that's because Apex is how it is. All the components, a chart, a report, a form, use the concept of a flat table, right? A report wants to have rows and columns, right? The form, interactive grid, they want to have rows and columns. And so the data profile is supposed to provide rows and columns because the Apex components want to have that. And so for the nested thing, that's the puzzle to solve beforehand. And the puzzle is a conceptual puzzle here, how to deal with the nested relationship and how to expose it to the Apex components. There will be some sort of maybe limited support once we introduce the ability to have, and that's what we are currently working on, the ability to implement sort of connector plugins, but I want to be very careful about this naming here, which allow you to hook into the process of the Apex engine actually calling the RESTful service, right? So that's what we are currently working on, to provide you guys hooks into that so that you can influence this process of invoking the REST API, getting data back, that you can have control there and hook your own code into that. That's something we are working on, but it's very early and definitively too early to provide details on
that. One more question from Jorgen. When do we get OData REST format in Apex?
Same answer as the previous one. Yeah. That what we when we're talking about connectors and the ability to have more control on how Apex calls the actual RESTful service. That's been actively worked on. However, when will it land? How do I like to say? That's a question about the future, and future is a difficult thing, right? You know that. That's can be very hard, and forecasts are difficult, especially when they are based on the future, right?
Yeah. I think maybe a couple of questions more, and then we can close the session. Susan is saying, so this is a tutorial one can build. I think she's referring to the movie thing, the API for the movie.
So whether there is
yeah.
a tutorial.
Well, I believe yes. If you follow the steps that Carsten did, the movie databases has open APIs, so you can have an account, and yeah, you can create something.
You need to create. You need to get an API key for this movie database, but it's free, right? So that's what I use. But there are plenty of other APIs available, right? That's just an example which I like to use for demos because I don't have to explain the REST API and the data. Everybody knows what a movie is. So this demos well and allows me to focus on the concepts in Apex. But there are several other APIs. GitHub is a nice API to tap into. Google Books has a nice API to tap into. And there are several APIs you can use. And outside of Central Europe, when you go to the US, I've learned that there are great open data APIs to tap into, which is not available in Central Europe. But in other areas of the world, there is plenty of opportunity to use APIs for this.
Thank you, Carsten. I think that's it for your session. I would like to remind all the attendees to provide the feedback on the Epics at Home website, which I put on the chat. Thank you very much. We will take around 4 minutes break for the next session.
It was a pleasure and great. It's just such a great turnout, such a great event, this Apex at Home. And it was really, I was delighted to be able to present here. Thanks a lot, guys, and have fun for the remaining sessions.